Hi folks, this is Dr. Leitner, and in this short video I am going to go over a few facts about the play and some tools or patterns that I want you to think about while you are watching or rewatching A Midsummer Night's Dream. These tools are repeated structures that appear in virtually every play, so once you are used to seeing them, you will recognize them again in another play and say, hey, that's very similar to Midsummer Night's Dream, and one of the pleasures of literature is the delight of that recognition. Now, the play itself was written no later than 1598. It was at that time it was mentioned in a book. It had been mentioned in a book called Palladius by a fellow named Francis Meres, and he's not important. But what's important is it had to have been performed and written before that year. So some scholars put it around 1595. They think it's written around the same time as Romeo and Juliet, although they don't have a whole lot of direct evidence for that. They just look at the plays and that's the conclusion they come to. But one thing that is interesting about this play is that it is the first time that fairies appear on stage as small people with wings, and they're cute and that kind of thing. Today, in part influenced by illustrations of the play, that have appeared in different published versions throughout the years, there is a standard fantasy concept of what fairies look like, even as iconic an image as Disney's Tinkerbell from Peter Pan owes its origin to the play. And for the first few hundred years, this play was performed with sweet and innocent type fairies, but around 1970, the performance has changed, and now very often you will see it with kind of more scary and surreal and nightmarish type fairies. Now, one way to approach this play is to not obsess about the plot and understanding exactly what is happening to each exact character, because that's just going to get you confused. So, you have multiple couples, you have multiple plot lines, you have people falling in love, and this is compounded by the fact that many of the characters are not particularly memorable. Lysander and Demetrius are basically the same stock character of the dashing but not too smart gentleman, and Lysander admits as much in the first scene when he says, quote, "I am, my lord, as well derived as he, as well possessed. My love is more than his, my fortunes every way as fairly ranked, if not with vantage as Demetrius's." And so, they admit that they are basically the same person. And when Puck goes to put love juice in Demetrius's eyes, he gets the wrong Athenian and he puts it in Lysander's. So that is another example of how similar these two people are. And even Hermia and Helena are very similar. They are, again, stock characters of the devoted and romantic young woman. And Shakespeare in the play has to make one of them short so that the audience can actually tell them apart. Okay, so one tool that I want you to think about is called the double plot tool. So instead of focusing on the plot as a whole, think of it as there's kind of the same plot is happening on different levels. Basically the patterns that the characters are in. This is the double plot tool. Virtually every Shakespeare play has a structure of high and low plots. That is, a plot concerning the upper class characters and another dealing with the lower class characters. So a question to ask yourself are, how does this dynamic arise from Shakespeare's own theaters and audiences? Watch carefully for how these plots relate to each other. Are they parallel? Do they contrast? Do they mirror one another? Does each face the same dramatic obstacles, or do they differ? And what does Shakespeare gain by structuring the plays in this way? Now, the high plot is the main plot of the play. It involves the high or the royal characters. The low plot is that of the lower class characters, the sort of people Shakespeare probably was much more familiar with. The low plot in a Shakespeare play always mirrors the high plot. In this way, the mechanicals from A Midsummer Night's Dream, or the low class characters, have gathered in the forest at night so that they can rehearse the play they hope to perform for Theseus's wedding day, called Pyramus and Thisbe, a classical love story that Shakespeare probably read in school. This is a tragic story of blocked love. The fathers of Pyramus and Thisbe refuse to let the young lovers come together, and in their attempt to escape this block, the young lovers tragically die. It's the same as the Romeo and Juliet story, the very tragedy that Shakespeare may have been writing perhaps concurrently in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Now, why do I say that Shakespeare is probably more familiar with the lower class characters? Well, he lived and worked, Shakespeare lived and worked when he was an actor and a playwright in a very shady area of London where there were brothels and taverns and all the smelly and polluting trades like tanning and butchery and that kind of thing. So he lived amongst those people, and that's where the theaters were as well. They could not be, at that time, London was run by the Puritans, and they could not have theaters actually in the city limits. So they were all pushed out into these kind of ghettos, kind of these unsavory parts of town. So Shakespeare knew these people, and he lived with these people. So the other tool that I want to talk about is the block to love tool. This appears repeatedly in Shakespeare's work. Pay close attention to how this block comes about and what causes the block. Is it a father figure or a figure of law? Is the block external, coming from society, or internal, coming from within the lovers themselves? How does the response to this block determine the play's ultimate mode? That is, either comedy or tragedy. This block occurs especially in A Midsummer Night's Dream, Immersion to Venice, As You Like It, Hamlet, and The Tempest, and of course Romeo and Juliet. So the play actually starts with a block to love, with the old man Aegeus, who is demanding that his daughter marry the particular young man he has chosen. Okay, so Aegeus himself is the block to love. And some variation of the block to love appears in many of these characters. So there's Theseus and Hippolyta, between both pairs of young lovers, between Oberon and Titania, between Titania and Bottom. And in fact, wherever there is a love interest in Shakespeare, you can almost bet that these two will have some challenge to overcome. Shakespeare doesn't just let lovers let them alone. So, and here is the payoff for understanding this tool. If the block to love is overcome, then the lovers will be married at the end of the play, and it's a comedy. However, if the block to love is not overcome, then the lovers will die and the play is a tragedy. And we see examples of this in Romeo and Juliet and Othello. In Midsummer Night's Dream, we see that the lovers overcome the block and they are married in the end. But in the Pyramus and Thisbe play, which is in the middle of the play, it's performed at the end, but it's a play within a play, the lovers are not able to overcome the block. So even in A Midsummer Night's Dream, both examples are laid out for us. All right.